Welcome back to Anatomiqa. In the previous session, we had discussed about the terminologies for describing the bone features. In this session, we will discuss the structure, parts, and neurovascular supply of the long bone. To start with, we will take a look at the gross structure of an adult long bone. Naked eye examination of the longitudinal and transverse sections of a long bone shows the following features. Let us look at the shaft. A part of the bone is removed to show the inner features of bone. From outside inwards, it is composed of periosteum, cortex, and medullary cavity. Periosteum is a thick fibrous membrane covering the external surface of the bone. Periosteum is united to the underlying bone by Sharpey's fibers, and the union is particularly strong over the attachments of tendons and ligaments. At the articular margin, the periosteum is continuous with the capsule of the joint. The abundant periosteal arteries nourish the outer part of the underlying cortex. Periosteum has a rich nerve supply which makes it the most sensitive part of the bone. Periosteum is absent in sesamoid bones. Functions of periosteum are: it is osteogenic, helps in bone growth and bone repair, and is protective in nature. Cortex is made up of compact bone which gives it the desired strength to withstand all possible mechanical strains. Medullary cavity is lined by endosteum. The osteoblasts in the endosteum contributes to new bone formation, helping in bone repair and remodeling of the bone. The medullary cavity is filled with red or yellow bone marrow. At birth, the marrow is red everywhere with widespread active hematopoiesis. As the age advances, the red marrow at many places atrophies and is replaced by yellow fatty marrow with no power of hemopoiesis. Red marrow persists in the cancellous ends of the long bones, sternum, ribs, iliac crest, vertebrae, and skull bones throughout life. Ends of long bones are expanded and are made of cancellous bone. The articular end of bone is covered with articular cartilage, which is nothing but hyaline cartilage without periosteum. So that were the parts and features of adult long bone. Now, let us check out the parts of a young or growing long bone. A young bone presents 4 parts. Diaphysis in the center of the bone, epiphysis present at both ends of the bone, epiphyseal cartilage present on both sides of bone, and metaphysis which is present on both sides of shaft of the bone close to epiphyseal cartilage. The details of each part will be discussed now. Diaphysis is the part of the bone ossified from primary center and forms the central elongated shaft of bone. It is made of peripheral, compact, and central spongy bone. Epiphysis is the part of the bone ossified from the secondary center. It is the peripheral expanded ends made of spongy bones covered with hyaline cartilage. Epiphysis is of 3 basic types: pressure epiphysis, traction epiphysis, atavistic epiphysis. But sometimes a 4th type, aberrant epiphysis, may also be present. Looking into one by one, pressure epiphysis develops due to articulation and transmission of weight. It transmits the body weight and protects the epiphyseal cartilage. Head of femur, head of humerus, condyles of femur, and tibia are examples of pressure epiphysis. Traction epiphysis. It is produced by the pull of some muscles. It is non-articular and does not take part in the transmission of weight. It always provides attachment to one or more tendons which exert traction on the epiphysis. The traction epiphysis ossifies later than the pressure epiphysis. Trochanters of femur and tubercles of the humerus are examples of traction epiphysis. In a bone where both pressure and traction epiphysis are present, the ossification centers appear earlier in the pressure epiphysis than that of the traction type. Atavistic epiphysis It is phylogenetically an independent bone and is attached secondarily on a host bone to receive nutrition from the host. It grows like a parasite. Classical examples are known in the human body. Coracoid process of the scapula, posterior tubercle of talus, also known as the ostrigonum. Aberrant epiphysis. It is not always present. The metacarpal bones usually have one epiphysis present at the base of first metacarpal and at the head of other metacarpal bones. Aberrant epiphysis is the secondary epiphysis which develops at the head of the first metacarpal and the base of other metacarpal bones. Based on number of secondary ossification centers, epiphysis can be classified into simple and compound epiphysis. In simple epiphysis, more than one epiphysis are present at one or both ends of a long bone. Each epiphysis unites with the diaphysis by separate epiphyseal plate. This type is found at the upper end of femur. In the compound epiphysis, the multiple epiphyses unites first with one another and later fuse with the diaphysis by one epiphyseal plate. Upper and lower ends of humerus belong to this type. The epiphyseal union on both the ends does not take place simultaneously. One epiphysis fuses with the diaphysis earlier than the other end, which fuses later. The epiphysis which unites last with the diaphysis grows for a longer period before union. Hence, it is known as the growing end of the bone. So, growing end of the long bone is that end where the secondary center appears first and unites last with the diaphysis. The growing end is situated against the direction of the nutrient foramina of that bone. The nutrient foramina conveying nutrient vessels is situated near the middle of the shaft of long bone. The direction of nutrient foramina of long bones can be remembered by using the following dictum. To the elbow I go and from the knee I flee. Therefore, in upper extremity, shoulder and wrist ends of the bones, that is upper end of humerus and lower ends of radius and ulna, are the growing ends. In the lower extremity, knee ends of the femur, tibia and fibula, that is lower end of femur and upper ends of tibia and fibula, are the growing ends. The knowledge of the growing ends is important in clinical practice. An injury or infection of this end in young age makes the bone stunted in growth. Law of union of epiphysis is the law enunciates that the epiphyseal center which appears first unites last with the diaphysis and vice versa. In fibula, the law is violated, that is, the center which appears first fuses first. Epiphyseal cartilage, the third part of young long bone, is a plate of hyaline cartilage which intervenes between the epiphysis and diaphysis of a growing bone. Proliferation of cells in this region is responsible for growth of long bone. As long as a bone grows in length, epiphyseal cartilage persists. When the full length is reached, usually after puberty, the epiphyseal cartilage is replaced by the bone. Ossification center appears earlier in females than in males, and the fusion between the epiphysis and the diaphysis is completed earlier in females by as much as 2 or 3 years. Metaphysis. The end of diaphysis facing towards the epiphyseal cartilage is known as the metaphysis. A bone grows in length at the expense of metaphysis. It is most actively growing area of a long bone. Metaphysis has profuse blood supply from the nutrient, periosteal and juxtaepiphyseal arteries. Here, the nutrient arteries form hairpin-like capillary loops. Microorganisms circulating in the blood may settle in these loops. Hence, infection of a long bone affects primarily the metaphysis. Muscles, ligaments, and joint capsules are attached close to the metaphysis. As a result, this area is likely to be damaged by the shearing strain of the muscles. The juxtaepiphyseal strain predisposes to infection. Sometimes a part of the metaphysis may lie within the capsule of joint. In such circumstances, the diseases of metaphysis may affect the joint or vice versa. With this, we have completed the parts of the adult long bone and developing long bone. Now, let us discuss the blood supply of bones. Nutrition of bones differs according to the types of bone. For each type, there is a general plan of blood supply. Let us start with the blood supply to typical long bones. A long bone is supplied by 4 sets of blood vessels: nutrient artery, metaphyseal arteries, epiphyseal arteries, and periosteal arteries. Just for the sake of understanding, I have given different colors for different arteries. When you draw, use only red color for arteries. Nutrient artery grows in the periosteal bud and enters the middle of the shaft of the bone through nutrient foramen. The artery presents a tortuosity. This tortuosity minimizes the blood pressure during movement of bone and allows movement of the bone without affecting the nutrient vessel. Within the bone, the artery divides into 2 branches known as the nutritiae, named as ascending and descending branches, one for each end. Each branch subdivides into a number of smaller parallel vessels which enter the metaphysis and form hairpin-like loops. These loops anastomose with periosteal, juxtaepiphyseal, or metaphyseal and epiphyseal arteries. Therefore, the metaphysis is the most vascular area of a long bone. The nutrient artery supplies the bone marrow or the marrow cavity filled with bone marrow and inner 2/3 of the compact part of the diaphysis. The artery enters the compact bone through the Oakman's canal and provides nutrition to the Haversian systems. The osteocytes in lacuna present between the adjacent lamellae of Haversian system receive nutrition by diffusion through the anastomosing canaliculi which arise from the central canal. It is obvious, therefore, that the Haversian systems should not be of greater diameter. Otherwise, the osteocytes in the outer layers would suffer from nutrition. On an average, it is estimated that each Haversian system is about 1/5 of a millimeter in diameter. The outermost osteocytes in the Haversian system should be lying around 1/10 of millimeter from the vessels of the central canal to get its nutrition. Some bones, such as femur, have several nutrient arteries, whereas other bones like tibia have only one. Juxtaepiphyseal or metaphyseal arteries. Metaphyseal vessels directly enter the metaphysis. The metaphyseal vessels are numerous in number and are small vessels arising from the anastomosis of the neighboring systemic vessels around the joint and pierce the metaphysis along the attachment of the joint capsule. Epiphyseal arteries, they arise from the periarticular vascular arcades present on non-articular surfaces of long bones. The epiphysis may be of 2 types according to the mode of blood supply: vessels passing through epiphyseal plate and vessels passing directly to epiphysis. In the first type, articular cartilage surrounding the articular surfaces and epiphyseal plate or epiphyseal cartilage present between the diaphysis and epiphysis are continuous with each other, such as in the head of the femur. In such circumstances, the artery pierces the epiphyseal cartilage and supplies the epiphysis. The artery is vulnerable to injury in epiphyseal separation, producing avascular necrosis of epiphysis. In the second type, articular cartilage is not continuous with epiphyseal cartilage. Here, the blood vessels enter the epiphysis without piercing epiphyseal or articular cartilage. Consequently, avascular necrosis is not a possibility in epiphyseal separation of this type. Epiphyseal cartilage of a young bone gets nutrition mostly from epiphyseal arteries. After fusion of diaphysis and epiphysis in adults, epiphyseal arteries anastomosis with juxtaepiphyseal and nutrient arteries. Coming to the fourth type of arteries, periosteal arteries. Numerous periosteal vessels ramify beneath the periosteum and enter the Oakman's canal to supply the Haversian system in the outer 1/3 of the compact part of the bone. These are numerous near the muscular and ligamentous attachment. So, those were the four arteries supplying the typical long bone. Coming to the venous drainage of typical long bone, veins are numerous and large in the spongy bone. In the compact bone, they accompany arteries in the Oakman's canal. All the arteries are accompanied by respective veins. So, coming to the second type of bone, blood supply to short long bones. Blood supply to short long bones. These bones possess single epiphysis, single epiphyseal plate, and therefore single metaphysis at only one end of each short bone. Nutrient artery enters the middle of the shaft and is immediately dividing and forming into a plexus. That is why infection begins in the middle of the shaft of the short long bones in early years of life. On the contrary, in typical long bones, infection is mostly confined to the metaphyseal ends of the shaft because of hairpin-like loops of nutrient vessels. Epiphyseal and juxtaepiphyseal vessels. There are one set of epiphyseal and metaphyseal or juxtaepiphyseal vessels since epiphysis is present on one end of the bone only. These supply epiphyseal end of the bone similar to typical long bones. Periosteal vessels. In adults, periosteal vessels supply the major part of the bone and replace the nutrient vessel. Hence, infection of short long bones is less frequent in adults. Blood supply to flat bones. Nutrient artery pierces the compact part of the flat bones and subdivides into smaller branches which ramify through the entire bone. Periosteal vessels are numerous and provide a major share in the nutrition of the bone. Blood supply to irregular bones. Arterial supply of a vertebra. The vessels supplying the vertebra enters it from various directions and supply the bone. One or more vessels enters the body from behind through the basivertebral foramina. A set of small vessels pierce the anterolateral surface of the body. One vessel pierces the root of the transverse process and supplies the vertebral arch and its various processes. With this, we complete blood supply to the various types of bones. Arterial supply is very important. The venous drainage is easy to remember since the veins accompany the arteries. Coming to the nerve supply to the bone, the local nerves supplying the skin and muscles of that particular region also supplies the bones. Subcutaneous periosteum is supplied by the nerves of the underlying skin. In deeper parts, the local nerves, usually the branches to nearby muscles, provide the supply. Periosteum in all part of the body is very sensitive. Other nerves, probably vasomotor in function, accompany nutrient vessels into bone. With this, we finish the parts and neurovascular supply to various types of bones. In the next session, we will discuss on the histology of bone.